So Ukraine's strategy to cut off Crimea is working, and today, Russians are sounding even more nervous than usual about the fate of the peninsula, with one Russian war correspondent just a few hours ago saying, quote, "In Crimea, there's no gas at all. The promise to turn Crimea into an island is being fulfilled by the Ukrainians better than our promises that all of the goals of the special military operation will be achieved," end quote. I mean, I get the nervousness. When you watch every single route into and out of the peninsula come under increased Ukrainian drone fire, it has to feel like the walls are closing in. Now, last night, Rybar reported a new massive strike on Crimea, saying, quote, "On the night of June 21st, Ukrainian forces launched another raid on Crimea. The main target was again the Kerch transport and logistics hub, the area of the Crimean bridge, the port, the ferry crossing, and the adjacent fuel and railway infrastructure." They added that traffic on the Crimean bridge was blocked for more than 7 hours. And this is just one component of this overall blockade that we're seeing play out. So turning to a map here, a deep state map, this is the Crimean Peninsula in the southern portion of Ukraine, so occupied by Russian forces in 2014, increasingly becoming isolated. And this is an interesting dynamic because Russia sees it playing out. In fact, we've got a segment in today's video where a Russian media channel lays out exactly what the plan is, and they've so far been unable to stop it. So moving into Crimea, which is entirely dependent on supplies coming into the peninsula, you've got two overland crossings to the north that are increasingly under Ukrainian drone fire. You've got the Kerch Bridge in the east, the Sea of Azov moving from Russian territory to the peninsula, and then airlift. Airlift is like less than 1% of the supplies needed and negligible. You can't bring in enough fuel for the peninsula by air. By water, it's been heavily cut off at this point. We'll get to that here in a moment. So you've got the overland routes. The north has been heavily targeted recently, and overnight, the Kerch Bridge area. In fact, a lot of Russians right now are getting increasingly concerned that that bridge has a limited life expectancy at this point. So two majors talking about what happened here says from June 21st, ferry services across the Kerch crossing will temporarily not be available. Since heavy-duty vehicles are prohibited from traveling over the Crimean bridge, drivers need to find an alternative land route, the R280 highway through Rostov-on-Don. So again, the only access route technically over land, trucks can drive from Russia to Crimea over the Kerch Bridge, already limited due to previous Ukrainian attacks. Heavy equipment was only going across via ferry. Well, the ferry got hit yesterday, okay? Enough of those hit to suspend crossings for a while. So now these trucks have to drive around to the north. Significant distance here. We'll bounce it around a little bit, but if you're not exactly following these roads, but moving around, you're talking about an extra 900 kilometers. That's no joke. Added fuel, extra wear, just the delay in getting supplies to or from this peninsula. So that's now the issue, but also this entire southern corridor is increasingly under Ukrainian fire control with their drones. So they are hitting targets left, right, and center all throughout this and really focusing in on these land approaches to northern Crimea. In fact, this led Rybar to put out a couple different pieces today that we're going to run through. One of them, he talked about the deteriorating situation in the south. And they lay out the actual Ukrainian plans as we see it happening in real time. But before getting into that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Plaud AI. Look, I'm not a good listener, and I know it's not great, something I'm working on, but I'm guilty of my mind just kind of wandering off rather than fully absorbing what somebody is saying. And, pulling out the phone to take notes doesn't really help, not to mention that it's incredibly rude to do that during a conversation. As soon as I start typing something out, I'm even less focused on listening than I was before, which makes it a little challenging in meetings and conferences. So today's video is sponsored by Plaud. And yes, I actually use it because it solves this exact problem for me. It's the size of a credit card. It clips magnetically to the back of your phone and it records, transcribes, and summarizes your conversations automatically. I mean, I can hit record and then stay focused on the conversation and instead of having to worry about taking notes or remembering every nuanced detail. And then afterwards, Plaud identifies who said what, organizes everything into a wide range of easy-to-use templates and formats, and creates detailed summaries, action lists assigned to different participants, and even additional resources for further research. Honestly, the best part is being able to search back through it later, like a Google search for my brain, rather than trying to figure out exactly where I heard a certain phrase. And of course, Plaud is built on global security standards with encryption, strict access controls, and global compliance certifications to make sure your data is secure and private. So if you're in sales, consulting, or just the person in your organization who's supposed to remember every single little detail, this was made for you. So check the link in the description and use code Preston for 15% off during one of Plaud's biggest sales of the year. And thank you so much to Plaud for sponsoring today's video. Now, Rybar published this graphic earlier today, essentially saying we know the Ukrainian plan. We know exactly what's playing out here. They said there are 3 phases to this. 1, stopping shipping in the Black Sea. 2, eliminating fuel reserves in Crimea. And 3, disrupting logistics along the land corridor. We're watching every one of these play out right now. So this isn't really a phased approach, like 1, then 2, then 3. There's a little bit of that, but by and large, these are all playing out at the same time. So number 1, stopping shipping in the Black Sea. According to Rybar, quote, since mid last year, Ukraine began a targeted campaign between Crimea and Krasnodar Krai by the sea. Systematic drone strikes on port infrastructure began with the goal of weakening cargo flows and shipping. This did not lead to a complete collapse of all maritime logistics, but created numerous problems in the form of rising freight rates, insurance premiums, and a decrease in the number of those willing to enter Russian ports or the region. So by and large, Krasnodar Krai over here in kind of across the Sea of Azov from Crimea. So this area here, a lot of ports that could move supplies. You know, this is how so much supplies is moved around the world, right? By rail and then by sea. So there's a number of rail lines that end in ports around here that could be moving supplies relatively frequently across to Crimea. But because those have come under increased Ukrainian drone strikes, both unmanned surface vessels and UAVs, the volume here has dropped off significantly. And I should note that even over the course of the last year or two, it's less than 5% of all necessary supplies into Crimea are coming via sea. So this is already a limited route. Ukraine has effectively shut that off. The second, according to Rybar, is eliminating the fuel reserves in Crimea. We just got a video, I think yesterday, showing that somehow these fuel storage facilities in Crimea that is facing a significant fuel shortage right now are seemingly unprotected. I mean, it looks like Ukrainian drones are flying in, hitting this thing left, right, and center, and they even have recon drones nearby watching these explosions. But according to Rybar, they say, quote, simultaneously, Ukraine struck oil storage facilities and transshipment bases in Crimea and along the coast of Krasnodar Krai. This led to the situation where fuel shortage on the peninsula is becoming practically fuel storage on the peninsula became practically impossible, and Crimea became even more dependent on external supplies. What they're getting at there is Crimea is no longer able to hold up long-term reserves, so without a constant flow of new fuel coming into Crimea, it shuts off very quickly. All right, they don't have anything to tap into. That leads to the third part here. Again, all of these kind of playing out side by side, the disruption of logistics along the land corridor. Rybar says, and when maritime logistics became difficult and Crimea had limited fuel reserves of its own, Ukraine began attacking the land corridor with medium-range drones, which led to massive disruptions in supplies to the peninsula. So again, this northern approach here is where we've seen, and we've seen it slowly creep, right? At one point, it was just in Donetsk, then it was down in Mariupol, then it was along this entire southern corridor. And in recent weeks, we've seen a heavy barrage of Ukrainian drones targeting some of these crossing points. And one of the issues is there's only 2. All right, so Ukraine can watch these pretty closely. That's a relatively short-range launch, especially from Kherson or Zaporizhia, and they are causing a lot of damage to Russian logistics. And to drive this point home, we have Russians inside of Crimea regularly talking about the situation there. So this isn't just a best guess. We've got, this is coming reported from a number of Russian channels, this specific one from Romanov. He quoted the head of the Crimean Republic saying that starting today at 9 a.m. local time in Crimea, fuel sales at Crimean gas stations have been stopped. Like, that's it. Not rationed. Not you have to have certain credits. Not you can only get it at certain times of day. No fuel sales in Crimea starting this morning for any civilians. They said they will continue to provide fuel for state and emergency services, but that happened fast. So when you hear people talk about there's no issue in Crimea or there's no shortage in Crimea, maybe have them give a call to the head of the Crimean government, the Russian Crimean government, who as of this morning has shut off all fuel sales to the civilians there. Now, Rybar, in talking to this, said, quote, essentially, now after partially achieving goals in the form of a fuel collapse and power supply disruptions, the enemy clearly intends to move to the final stage of its long-term campaign, the ultimate goal of which is to strike the Crimean Bridge. Maybe there's a lot more symbolism to this than anything. So again, the Crimean Bridge over here in the east, very significant. that Russia built after taking over the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. But we've already seen a significant disruption in logistics. But Rybar went into some detail about what munitions to expect to carry out this type of strike. They said, quote, the load on the Crimean bridge in the coming weeks will clearly increase and strikes will intensify. They're running out of options to get to and from the peninsula. All right. So if you are, say, a family trying to take vacation there, because that's what we've seen throughout this war is Russian families, affluent Russian families going to Crimea during a time of war to take vacation, you only got a few routes to get there. They're probably not driving through Mariupol and Melitopol and all these areas now because there are Ukrainian drones just hunting up and down. There's burning fuel trucks all along the road. They're probably looking at the bridge. The bridge is becoming even more constricted. When talking about the possibilities of how Ukraine could affect the bridge, Rybar says they include the FP2 UAV with a 200-kilogram warhead and a range up to 370 kilometers, which means from Zaporizhia, it can easily reach Kerch. Let's do that real quick from the Kerch Bridge. Talk about ranges here. From up in Zaporizhia, 270 kilometers, no issue there. Ukraine has a number of munitions that can range that. Of course, from anywhere in Kherson, 300 kilometers. But yeah, the Kerch Bridge, well within range. We've known that for a while. They say, however, more dangerous is the Flamingo, the Ukrainian domestically manufactured cruise missile that we've seen actually used effectively here in the last week or so. They say it has a warhead that reaches 1,000 kilograms, and according to Rybar, at least the Russian assessment, Ukraine has 60 of these ready to go. We'll see, but you can see a scenario where a number of those are launched, drones used to overwhelm air defenses, maybe unmanned surface vessels operating in the area, and then a couple, 2, 3, 4, maybe a dozen Flamingo cruise missiles from different headings come in to try to take out the bridge. Rybar says the emerging logistics problem on the peninsula, given the emerging logistics problem on the peninsula, it would be naive not to expect an intensification of strikes by Ukraine, and the coming weeks will likely become extremely important. He says not just in addition to these strikes, but he says with Ukraine, there will be attempts to infiltrate USVs, unmanned surface vessels, to the bridge, and he takes it a step further. He says to destabilize the situation overall, further amphibious maneuvers are possible in both western Crimea and the Kherson direction. Personally, I think that's a pretty significant ask. There's a lot of risk involved with that, but it gives you an idea of where we stand today if prominent Russian channels are talking about the possibility, the door being opened for a Ukrainian amphibious operation in Kherson or Crimea. Again, to stress, I don't think that's in the cards, at least nothing large scale, but the fact that Russia is talking about that at all is pretty insane. All right, so quick fundraiser update. We just crossed a pretty significant milestone, 300,000 euros raised so far this year, just with Car for Ukraine. That's incredible. And it's not like big donors coming in, although there are some. Shout out to one of them, Jace, in a second here. But we're seeing a ton of $5, $10, $20 donations. But there's so many of you that are committed to helping out those that are at the front and genuinely need these vehicles to save lives day in and day out, that it adds up, and it adds up very quickly. So you can learn more about this campaign at the link in the description below. But real quick, want to shout out Jace. We'll keep the information here, the rest of the information confidential until we get approval from him to share more of this. But Jace is a donor that, at this point, to my knowledge, has contributed an entire vehicle. All right, I think that's 11,000 euros. So that's the kind of person that we have right now, jumping on board, helping out in any way they can, the guys at the front in some of the hottest sectors of Ukraine, fighting day in and day out. So Jace and everybody contributing to this effort, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.